eventually. Welcome to the Second Line Show. I'm Nola Nash. Let's let the good times roll. Hi, and welcome once again to the Second Line Show. I am your host, Nola Nash, and we are talking dysfunctional families with a group of authors today. Not their families, families in their books. So we're going to have a great conversation about all of those things that make those dysfunctional families something that readers actually like to read about. So we've got a great bunch of ladies here. It's been a good time getting to know them, and they're from all over the country. So we've got lots of things to talk about today. I also have an excellent story for you for our New Orleans History and Mystery. It's an iconic story. Some of you may know a little bit about this. So when we get there, you may have your own things to add to that. So before we get going, though, I want to remind all of you from wherever you are watching, whether you're watching on YouTube, on Facebook, on Nola's Second Line, World of the Right Review, or anywhere else on my page, Amy McDonald's page, any of the ladies' page that are guests on this show, wherever you're watching from. You can leave comments and they will show up for us in our feed, and we will try to get to some of those questions and comments throughout the show. And we love to see where you're from. So if you give StreamYard permission to use your Facebook profile, then we'll be able to see you and your name. But if not, totally fine. You do not have to do that. But if you choose not to, go ahead and put your name in the comments just so we know who's here chatting with us today. And if we can't get to all of your comments during the show or your questions during the show, never fear. We will check those comments in all of those places later on. And even if you're watching in a replay, go ahead and put those comments there. It does send me a notification, and I'll be happy to go and answer questions as I can and chat with you a little bit about the show after the fact. So without further ado, I am going to let the ladies introduce themselves. So let me get me off of here. Welcome, everyone. And I see we got Amy on. Yay! Glad you could join us, Amy. Thank you so much for working hard through that powering through the internet trouble. We love that. So we've got 6 fantastic ladies here. And on the Second Line Show, the way we do introductions is Brady Bunch style. So since we are in our Brady Bunch squares, we're going to go right over here. And I'm going to let Diana Wypal introduce herself, and then we'll go around our little Brady Bunch circle here. So Diana, tell the folks a little bit about yourself, please, ma'am.
All right. Hi, I'm Diana Paul, and I am here in Carmel, California. And this is where we enjoy everything about the good life. And I love to read all genre. I write mainly about family sagas, the theme of today, and also mysteries and rom-com. And most of all, I am influenced by Buddhism. I taught Buddhism at Stanford, and the theories of Buddhism and karma and the consequences and unintended consequences of families and their secrets and lies are very much a part of my stories.
That is really interesting stuff. And we're going to get to some more of that as we go through our conversation, because I want to hear about how you use that in your writing. All right, Elyssa, you're next in our circle over here. So you're on deck, my dear.
Hi, I'm coming to you from New York City. I am an author. I have my 4th novel coming out in a couple of weeks. It's called Last Summer at the Golden Hotel, and it is about a dysfunctional family, a follow-up to my last novel, The Floating Feldmans, which is also about a dysfunctional family. That one was set on a cruise ship. I'm also a teacher. I teach novel writing at Yale, where I went, and I'll be up there tomorrow with my students. And I think that might be it. I come from a dysfunctional family, and I love to write about them.
You have plenty of fodder for your writing, then. Gotta love that. All right, Shawn.
Hi, I am Shawn Nocher, and I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. I think I might be the newbie here. My first book doesn't come out until June 22nd of this year, but you can always pre-order. And my second book will come out the following year. And both of those, of course, are about dysfunctional families because it's my specialty. And other than that, my other job besides my writing is I co-founded a foundation called Love in the Trenches, and we run support groups for families of those who suffer from a substance use disorder. So I know dysfunction from every angle. So.
I don't know what happened there. All right, somehow I'm pushing too many buttons. Now, Shawn, tell everybody the title of the book that's coming out, because I love the title.
It's called A Hand to Hold in Deep Water. I have the arc. Of course, I don't have the book, so this is, and I'm, there. And I love my cover.
Here, hold it up again, Shawn, where we can see it a little bigger. Do it again. There we go.
Can you see that?
Yes, we can. I love the title of that book. What a cool title. And a beautiful cover. So congratulations on the book coming out. That is always awesome. Yeah. All right, Sarah, we're going to go down in our Brady Bunchness over to you. We're going to go around in a circle. It's circle time on the second lunch show. All right, Sarah, you're up.
All right. Hi, I'm Sarah Zachrich Jeng, and my debut novel, The Other Me, which I have, is coming out not until August 10th. It's a speculative thriller about an artist named Kelly who she's at her best friend's art opening, and then she walks through a door and suddenly finds herself living this whole different life where she's back in her hometown. She's, closer to her family with whom she has kind of a difficult relationship, and she's married to this guy that she went to high school with. So their marriage is obviously pretty dysfunctional because he's basically a stranger to her, though she has memories of their relationship. And the dysfunction in their relationship, the nature of it becomes more and more clear as the book goes on. So that's it.
Excellent. And great comment there from Elizabeth. Oh no. Should have gotten to Amy faster. I think her internet glitched out on her. Oh no. Well, I'll keep an eye out. Maybe she will join us again. So Christina, that puts you up next.
Oh, okay.
So go for it.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. So I'm the author of the novel, The Second Home.
There we go. There's Amy.
Can you see it there?
Yes, there it is.
And isn't the cover pretty? I think it's so pretty.
I do like it.
But it's a story of a dysfunctional family, and kind of about how secrets tear a family apart. The Gordon family is from Milwaukee. They travel to Cape Cod every summer, and then one summer everything goes wrong. And so when the siblings inherit the house on the Cape, they have to work through what had gone wrong that summer and kind of reconcile those things. I have another book that is coming out in July. I can't believe I have 2 pandemic releases. That's one. And my second book is called Shoulder Season. And that's about a dysfunctional person, maybe, instead of a family, about a Playboy bunny from 1981 who works at the old Playboy resort in Lake Geneva, which was actually a family resort, believe it or not. So that's me.
Awesome. And Amy, no. So close. We were so close. Okay, when Amy pops back in, we'll let her do her introduction too. I don't want to leave her out. That was just the most uncanny timing ever. Yeah. So all of you have, of course, Annie, thinking about Amy on the brain, watch for Amy coming back in. Annie has put together all of our groups for the show. She's a phenomenal executive producer for the show, and she joins everybody by things that their books have in common. And of course, dysfunctional families is what has brought you guys together, family drama, things like that. And I guess my first question to you as authors, as you choose to write about that, what do you think brings readers to books about family drama and dysfunction? Before you answer that, think about your answer. Think carefully, because Amy's back and we want to give her a chance to talk before she pops out again.
I'm on LTE now. We'll see if it works. I've been teaching all day, and it's just been an exercise in frustration. Also, I'm Amy Meyerson. I am the author of The Imperfects, which comes out in paperback at the beginning of May, and the title itself refers to the family and also the diamond story. It's about this family who, when their grandmother passed away, they discover a historic diamond among her belongings called Florentine Diamond, which has been missing in real life since the end of World War I and the fall of the Austrian Empire. So the family has no idea how their grandmother has this in her possession, and they've been estranged for years, and they have to work together to figure out if it lawfully belongs to them, and hopefully along the way confront some old deep-seated issues. So for this novel, my editor really encouraged me. I dug into the dysfunction in the family and tried to, find the humor in the way that people fight and clash. And yeah, it was actually a lot of fun to write the dysfunction.
Now that is something that you don't expect, that it's fun to write about dysfunction. I write, I've got a very, dark first series. And so I guess for me, it's fun to talk about magic and murder. So I suppose we all have our things that seem dark that we actually enjoy writing about. So again, with the original question, Amy, you didn't hear it, so I'm going to repeat it for you.
Okay.
What brings readers to books about dysfunctional families? What do you think kind of draws them in? You would think, dysfunctional families sounds like something that's like, that's their problem. If I'm going to read a book and relax, I don't want to read about problems. And yet we're drawn to those. So, they're fascinating books and lots of people like to read them. What do you think it is particularly about the genre in general, kind of that whole topic in general, or I guess it's a genre, it's not really a genre, it's more of a trope, I guess. And just sort of what has brought people to your own books that are about dysfunctional families? We are real laid back here on the Second Line show, so y'all just jump in. I'm a teacher. I'm not going to make you raise your hand. So teachers, Diana, Elyssa, we're not going to raise our hand here. You just jump in.
Well, I'll go first, I guess. To me, when I read a book, it's kind of like a mirror. You see what you see because of what's inside you. And I always think the readers kind of finish or complete the book. So I would think from book clubs and other groups that I've talked to about things unsaid, those who come from very happy families are just kind of curious about those who have dysfunctional families, because everyone has a friend at least who has had some pretty horrific family situations. So if you come from a happy family, you might read it because, thank God my family wasn't like this. And then if you came from a dysfunctional family, you might read that book, see some things that are similar, like a mirror, and also think, well, I wasn't alone. There are a lot of families that were worse than mine, or some like mine, and some very different from mine. So everybody comes from a family. So that's why I think the theme of family saga is so important and so popular.
Y'all jump right on in, build on that, however you want.
So I would agree with all of that, but
Sorry.
Go ahead, Elyssa. Go ahead.
Okay. I think it's interesting. First of all, I definitely agree with what Diana said. I think it's nice to not feel alone and to understand this is a universal story. I also think it's really interesting because if you have dysfunction among friendships, you can walk away. You can just divorce that friend, but you really can't do that with family. I mean, of course, we all know siblings that haven't spoken for 30 years, but even so, they still share a parent and nieces and nephews together. And so I think there's just great fodder when you think about people who they can't divorce from each other. And because I write humorous books and I use humor to diffuse tension in my own life, I think that family dysfunction is really actually rife with humor. If you can just step back 20 feet and take the ego out of it and the personal bruises out of it, actually a lot of the things that family members say to each other are like so absurd and ridiculous that there is humor there. And as an author, I see my job as mining the humor for my novels.
I like that phrase. That's awesome. Shawn, what were you going to say?
Well, it's interesting because what I really see when I look at dysfunctional families is how each person's dysfunction affects each other individual, how we respond to it. Sort of like the human body, if one organ starts to break down, all the other organs compensate or behave differently or don't behave well or whatever. And so that's always in the forefront of my mind when I'm writing these stories about family, how no member of that family is an island. And the fact that we're sort of stuck together, and we love each other for the most part in spite of each other. I'm fascinated by the way we play off of each other, how members respond. And I think that's what readers see too. I think they read about dysfunctional families and they think, well, now I understand why that person behaves that way. Look, it's not just where they came from, but what they're still dealing with. And we just continue to respond. And that connection is what a lot of people love in writing anyway. And I think you get a really intense look at it when you read stories about dysfunctional families.
Mm-hmm. I love the analogy of the organs of the body and how, you're all one unit. And then if one is breaking down, it can cause that chain reaction. Speaking of breaking down and chain reactions, Amy, you okay over there? Felt like we lost you there for a minute, but not the internet thing. Like, you good?
But particularly when, I guess this isn't Zoom, but particularly when it malfunctions. Yeah.
That happens so often. My puppy likes to sit up here on my desk when I'm teaching because, I'm just talking to a screen as far as he's concerned. I have, there's nothing going on here. But I was in the middle of a class one time and he sat on my computer and shut the whole Zoom down. And I was like, oh. So I feel like I totally feel like things go wrong. I had an entire class sitting there like, what? Where did Miss Nash go? Sorry, guys. Dudley's butt turned off the Zoom. So we have our problems. I totally get it. Amy, I got to say, as I'm looking kind of at your space that you're in, that is a really cool room you've got there. I love that.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm going to put our house in soon, so I'm going to be losing my office, which makes me really sad. But it was sort of an unexpected bonus of doing a lot of recordings as I get to show off my office, which I built after I started writing. I used my first advance to build it in our backyard. So feels like a very
that's so cool. Well, you'll have to write more books, get more advances, and build a new one. Because it's a really cool space. You need to make a carbon copy of that one. I love it.
Thanks. Yeah,
it's just awesome.
But it's just a convenient actual space. I was thinking about what Elyssa was saying earlier, and I think one of the things that interests me about families is that unconditional quality. And I think even if you are somewhat estranged from people, it still has, I don't know if that makes sense, but it still has that kind of that element of the unconditional and the way in which because you are stuck together and because generally people will ultimately forgive things with family because they have to, they won't forgive with other people, you end up exposing your truest self and saying things that you wouldn't say to other people in your life. So that's something that I always think about when I think about conflict with families on the page. It's just the ways in which the unconditional shapes us, exposes facets of our characters that we don't show to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a very good point. And so often you hear that adage, you tend to take things out on the ones that you love the most. That it's a safe place. And even if you're a dysfunctional family, there is that tie, there's that bond that almost gives you that carte blanche, that permission to just unload if that's what you need to do. And sometimes the unloading is healthy and sometimes it's not. And it can cause problems. But Elyssa, I liked what you said about stepping back that 20 feet and hearing what you've actually said to them. And oftentimes it's just idiotic. Why was that the angle I took in that fight? That made no sense. And it certainly was not worth even saying. But yet so often, we have that freedom with our families to just fire off at the mouth and say the things, speak without actually thinking about it. I do that routinely anyway. So anybody who's ever watched the show very often knows that I like to be just as surprised as everyone else about what's going to come out of my mouth. But when you're in an argument, it's not always a good characteristic to have. So what do you think, Christina, Sarah? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I want to build on what Amy said, because both of our books are both similar, The Second Home and The Imperfects, because it's they're both about families at a vulnerable time when there's an inheritance, when there's loss and the family structure changes. So I think for my book, the matriarch and patriarch of the family are gone, and that's always such a hard experience in a family. And also it reminded me of when my dad died. My sisters and I were going to his funeral, and I remember a friend of mine had lost both of his parents, and he said, when you go to the funeral, remember your sisters are not going to behave in their best way. Like everyone, because what you're going to realize when you go through a period like this is that everyone had a different relationship with your dad, and they're going to grieve differently and cut each other a ton of slack, because that's just what's going to happen when you get there. And I think that I've seen that in a lot of different ways, both with my own family and my husband's family now, because my father-in-law just passed away in February. And just seeing how when somebody's gone from the family, how it reveals so much about the different kinds of relationships different siblings and relatives had with each other. And it's fun to write about that because, I think like in general, most literature is written from liminal moments, when something's in a state of change. And that's when I think it's the hardest, but it's also the most interesting and revealing. So maybe that's why people like to read about it, because like anyone who's been in a family has seen it stressed and changed in some way.
Very true. Very true. Sarah, what about you?
Well, building on what other people have said and coming from the thriller writer's perspective, when you're in a family, family members can do really horrible things to each other, and it can get really dark. So you can have sort of these stories of people doing really bad things to each other, and like in my book, it ends up being very. It ends up being a pretty horrible thing that is happening to my main character. So it's just. Because you're in a family, you're stuck together. So you put up with things that you might not put up with from other people, even very dark, horrible actions.
Mm-hmm. And it's always interesting to me when you think about a dysfunctional family, and whether it's in a book or it's in real life, and you're kind of, experiencing this through someone else's life or your own life, you realize how little other people know about your own family dynamic. Even with social media, we put a lot of things out there, but we don't put everything out there. And so, when you have a crisis in a family, a loss, a change, something that has put the family in flux, you tend to talk to other people. If you need advice, you need support, and yet they don't necessarily know your whole family situation. They don't necessarily have friends, or not necessarily going to know all of the players involved. And so they're going to give very skewed advice. And so sometimes that can actually make things worse, where they meant to make things better because they don't know everything. Is that something that you guys play with as, the outsiders looking in at what this family is dealing with? Or are you guys focusing mostly on the nucleus of the family itself and how that's driving the whole story? Or a combination?
I wanted to say something. Yeah. Christine and Amy both talk about multi-generational families and inheritance, and I deal with the same thing in Things Unsaid. And that's what Things Unsaid really deals with: secrets, lies. Families don't often talk about money. We sometimes don't talk about inheritance. So it's all about what the lies families tell, and then the lies that the members choose to believe and those they choose to let go. And I found it interesting when I was developing the novel, and I had this women's group, and we'd go together and watch movies, and we talked about families. How many families never talked about money? Their parents who are, maybe are ready to die, or they think about what they're going to do as they age. And it's a big, big concern for the children, the adult children. But it's something that was almost considered forbidden in some families. Mm-hmm. It was a substitute for love, too. From the parents' perspective, they often thought of money and controlling the purse strings as controlling their love. and getting the children to do what they want and manipulating them. And that's where the dysfunction can come in some sagas.
Mm-hmm.
Some
And how many times do you hear about disinheriting one kid? You know, it's like, you know, you're disinherited. It's like, oh, then that's the control. So often it becomes control. It might have been disinheriting the child from, you know, a very meager sum, but they don't know how much that sum is. And just the fact that it is a controlling mechanism that they can use to stir up trouble. And very often it's not something that's discussed. And, you know, as you were talking, I'm thinking about my own family and knowing very little about, you know, what would I do or my brother do if, you know, when we faced that crisis, and we did have some issues with all of that at the very beginning of the pandemic when we lost my dad, and there were things we did not know and things that his wife did not know, you know, and things that he, you know, even my dad couldn't explain to her because he, you know, the things he was going through. So we had to kind of muddle through some of that. And luckily we were able to work together on that, but that's not always the case. And, you know, thinking about if something were to happen to my mom, I know where she keeps the papers. I don't know what's in the papers. Yeah. And that's not something that we've discussed. And so just having limited knowledge could lead to a lot of strife that could then stir things up, especially with something like that. And if it's, you know, if it is having to figure out where things are and what needs to happen, especially when you lose someone, there's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of things that need to be taken care of and a lot of opportunity for people to find fault in how other people are doing things, whether it is the way that they're grieving, whether it's pulling their weight on helping, you know, put those final things together, taking care of financial issues, all of those things. There's a lot of opportunity to cause friction. There's a lot of things that you can actually play with in that. And of course, that probably can lean a lot towards the thriller side of things as well, because as you start to find out what is in the papers in the drawer, you know, their papers are in the drawer, but you don't always know what is in the drawer. And Christina, your book as well, you start to go through things. And sometimes what you find is not what you expect and not necessarily something you want to deal with in the long run. So, but I love the juxtaposition that we have here between authors who use dysfunction with humor and authors who use dysfunction in, you know, the more thriller way. How do you decide? Is it a personality? Is it kind of how you view conflict that steers you to either make it the thriller or the comedy? How do you decide when you sit down and you think about, this is the scenario I'm going to work with, here's how I'm going to approach it? I would rather approach it where it's the funny side of the conflict, or this particular thing needs the intensity of a thriller. Is it a conscious decision, or does the book kind of steer itself?
When I started writing my book, I wasn't thinking of it as a thriller at all until I got to the agent stage. And then it kind of, the revisions kind of put it that way. But there is humor in it too, like in dialogue and in like the thoughts that people are having. Like one author I really like is Tana French, because she writes, you know, books about murder, but there's also these very strong, like Irish characters who have a lot of humor in the way they think and the way they speak. So I just really admire that you can be reading this book about in the middle of it.
No, there you go. You're back. We lost your audio for just a second there. You kind of dropped out. Say that last part again.
About Tana French. She incorporates humor in her books about murder. So I just appreciate that. I always appreciate that when an author can do that.
It is an interesting balance. And I think maybe the comedy in something as heavy as the thriller gives the reader a chance to breathe for a minute, and it almost resets the tension and lets it build again. So, you know, it's that moment that kind of like, that was funny. Okay, we're back into the action again. And you know, sometimes I feel like you need that breather for just a second, especially when you're reading these really intense books and then you're getting very angry at these families who can't handle their stuff. And you're just, you know, Annie was telling me about one of the books, I can't remember if it was Christina or for Diana. I think, Diana, it was your book, that Annie could not put down, and she literally threw it across the room and then went back and picked it up, and she read it in one sitting, but literally threw the book across the room. So it's great that you can create that kind of reaction in a reader, but definitely the humor can temper that for just a second, so they're not constantly throwing a book across the room.
Some readers did say that they just wanted to strangle Aida. I gave her the name Aida because of the operatic, the opera diva. But also there's humor. And I think humor is the other side, really, of a very serious moment. And the further you are from the situation, the more humor you can find in it. You know, as a teenager, you could always tolerate other trans parents and thought they were very funny. Whereas for that kid, the parents were so obnoxious that they sucked out all the oxygen in the room. It's that kind of idea. If you're distant from it, you can oftentimes see humor, where the people who are suffering through that obviously can't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's some
Elyssa,
humor.
that kind of goes with what you were saying too.
I mean,
Stepping back a little.
For me, the choice of writing humor versus a thriller, I can't write a thriller. I would love to, but it's really just not in my wheelhouse. It's not in my skill set. I wish it was, but I'm not good at planting the breadcrumbs along the way and the clues. It's just not how my brain works. I absolutely love to read thrillers, but I know my strengths as a writer, and that's just not where they lie. And I'm like just a naturally funny person, I've been told like many times. So it's like in my daily interactions, like I see everything through a humorous lens. So not that I'm not dark. I mean, like my favorite show is Forensic Files, and I watch it at night. And it actually it's like a lullaby. I put on Forensic Files to fall asleep. Like I find the narrator being like, and then they found blood spatter all over the plot. And I'm like, it just lulls me to sleep. I find it very relaxing.
My mom does the same thing. I'm like, how do you sleep watching that stuff right before you go to bed?
Stories about serial killers, but I can't write about them.
Yeah. No, she'll tell me about it too, and I'm like, I don't need to know about your serial killer. Don't give me ideas. I'm a writer. I'm gonna start putting them in books.
Like Scandinavian noir, I'm a real movie addict. I have a blog on movie reviews, and I love Nordic noir. The darker, the better. The more intense, the more I just love it. And then I can go to sleep. And I think part of it is because it's so different from anything that's going on in my mind. I just want to see what that world is like. I'm fascinated by a world that's so different. Mm-hmm. And so I'm with Elyssa. I can watch something like that and then snooze right after.
I think that's true. I think if I was going to play like the show Modern Family, but if I watch it right before bed, I mean, a lot of the parents in family relationships, like I identify with them. I have these issues with my kids. That's not going to, even though it's a cute, light show, it's not going to put me to bed. Mm-hmm. But like, luckily, I don't know a lot of serial killers. So.
That's great.
Right.
And it's like, I really agree with what Diana said. It's another world. It's got nothing to do with me, so I can fall asleep to it.
Yeah. I do think also when we talk about humor, I mean, my book's not particularly funny, but I'm funny, but the book isn't. But when we talk about families, though, they naturally are funny. Families are funny. I mean, they just are, and they have their own quirks that which is what I love when a writer writes something really funny about a family, and you know that is humor, that they're talking about humor that only the characters really get. And yet we get it, which is really a trick that some writers can really pull off very well. But naturally, I think every family is funny. They just are. You know?
It's sometimes we're just too deep in the middle to see it. Yeah.
Humor is really hard to sustain for a long time in a novel because it's just hard to not have it take a dark turn. And for my book, the family's reconciling something that happened that's pretty serious. So it would be hard to make the whole novel funny. You know, the tone of it would be difficult to establish. But I do have little moments of humor, and I love it when readers recognize them. You know, like there's this little they're kind of like inside jokes I have with readers. And if I'm in a book club or something and they have me zoom in and they mention like there's a funny thing about the family business. Nobody knows what this family business was. And then at the very end, I was like, oh, they make clipboards. No wonder they went out of business. Nobody uses them anymore. But like people who pick up on the clipboards, they'll kind of be like, oh, I read your book, clipboards, huh? You know, and I'm like, you get my joke I'm making with you.
Yeah.
I love it. What about you, Amy? Is it something that you set out to do intentionally, or is humor sort of just natural?
I think if you try to be funny, it fails usually. There are some people who I think are naturally funnier than others, but yeah, I always say to my partner that he's the only person, he and our 17-month-old son are the only people in the world who think I'm funny. So I've not been told by that many people that I'm funny. But yeah, I think whenever I've had moments of humor in my writing, I sort of stumble on it accidentally. And it's just another form of exposing fundamental truths. I mean, there's different kinds of humor, but I think that's the kind of humor that arises, at least in my writing, is where it's funny because it's true, where it feels honest, as opposed to, situational humor, physical humor, or anything like that. But I think what I've focused on more doing intentionally in my books is taking elements of mystery and imposing them onto books that aren't traditional mysteries. So books where I guess people have died in all my books, but they haven't been murdered or anything like that. And I like playing around with the conventions of mysteries and of form and clues and imposing them on a different kind of story. And I think for some reason, I haven't fully figured out, I think because every family has a mystery at its core, and it's sort of what you were saying before, all of these unknowns that drive us when they're exposed to want to know more about our families. And I think for me personally, that comes from a place of regret of not asking the older generations in my family about their lives before they passed away. And so at least with The Imperfects, one of the things I wanted to set out to accomplish when I started writing was, what can we know about the past based on what's left behind? And with the thesis and hope that we can learn stories even when the people who experience them are no longer around to tell us.
So when you say that, Amy, I think the other element of dysfunction in a family that's probably at the center of most of our books is the secrets. The things that we don't know, and the secrets that take on a life of their own and that turn into misunderstandings and the making of assumptions and rewriting history based, again, on what we don't know, which is really often with what we think of as a classically dysfunctional family. That's often at the root of it, whether it's hiding alcoholism or hiding abuse or hiding money or not telling, how mom got here or whatever it is, that the secrets breed dysfunction in a family.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it becomes the conclusions that people jump to because they're not always factually based. It has to do with their experience with that person and what their assumptions are, as opposed to what the truth is. And when that person's not there to actually fill in the gaps or unwilling to fill in the gaps, then you can end up with some drama because those people just are not communicating clearly or honestly and can cause some problems. But I love that the humor works in very organic ways. So that it's there's Amy back again. There we go. You're like my students when like 3 of them pop up and they're the same ones. And if they're trying whichever device will connect first.
I know.
I love it.
I felt like a student all day today because I was like teaching class with my camera off.
All of my 8th graders, yes. I teach to a bunch of black rectangles with a name on it. So I don't know what half of them look like. Middle schoolers don't want to turn their cameras on. I love it. Janet says that, and Janet writes stories about Norway as well. So Diana, you might like Janet's book. She says she can't write humor either, but apparently has had characters who've said funny things, but that's them, not her. So I love that. It's like the characters are funny, Janet's not. But I've been on a live show with Janet before. She's very funny. So give yourself some credit, Janet Oakley. But anyway, I think that the humor comes in when you're talking about the organic ways that it comes in, especially when you're dealing with siblings. and the family has, those stories about the sibling that, you can always use as ammunition. And sometimes when in levels of stress, you're going to throw that back at the sibling, but you never could do this, right? I mean, you didn't potty train until you were 7. I mean, there are things that you can those zingers that you can throw at siblings when you're in a heated moment and things like that maybe the reader would find funny, but perhaps the character was aimed at, not necessarily. But those types of things are always fun to work in. And again, give the reader time to breathe, because sometimes we need that as a reader, especially if we're identifying too much with the family. If it's hitting very much home, then maybe what we need is that moment to kind of just reset for a second and go, okay, not my family, their family, not my family, their family. And actually take a break.
With siblings, everybody has a different memory of what happened in a family. We all think a little bit differently. And so it's interesting when you get together with your siblings and you're like, oh no, it happened this way. Oh no, it didn't. It's so interesting. I wrote an essay once for the Sun magazine about my own family, and I sent it to my siblings, and things I thought were absolute truth. I wasn't making it up, and I tend to embellish because I'm a writer. But my sisters were like, "It didn't happen that way," or I was so floored that they would think that it was different, and they were so wrong, and I was so right. But maybe they were right, I was wrong. I don't know.
And then there are the stories that you remember and no one else does. Right? But, it's stuck in your head, but the siblings are like, "What? What are you even talking about?" My brother and I have these moments, and I'm a very small person. I'm 5 feet tall. There's not a whole lot of me. My brother, also not a big guy, but taller than me. And I remember one day when we were kids, we were sitting outside on the driveway doing something. I don't even know what we were doing, but he looked over at me and he looked at my legs that were stuck straight out in front of me. And it's my little brother. And he looked at me and he said, "That's it? That's all you got?" I will never forget him saying that. It was like, that is just the meanest thing to say. Like, what do you mean that's all I got? They go all the way to the ground. What are you talking about? But he's like, "I never said that to you. Why would I say that?" I don't remember doing that. But that moment I can remember very clearly, because I thought, what a weird thing for him to say. He's my little brother and he's the same size as me. I guess the only benefit was that he was one day going to become taller, and I probably wasn't. And didn't. So yeah, let's see. Amy, we're going to get rid of your very still self over there.
Okay, and my back.
And let your moving self come in. You're on.
One more time.
No, you're fine. This is fun. It's like musical Amy's. They're just cycling through.
I like having the two
I feel
Amy's.
like I'm making this all about me.
Isn't there always the sibling that does, though?
I am that sibling, so.
Amy's making it all about her. I know. I kind of like the two Amy's. I could put the still Amy back if we wanted. She's gone now. So we can always add the still Amy back. Well, speaking of dysfunctional families, I'm going to tell you a story from my home state of Louisiana. Now, this is a very iconic story for our New Orleans history and mystery segment. We're bringing out dysfunctional families here, and we're going to just, just wave them out in the wind like we often do in South Louisiana, because they make some of the best stories. So the story that I'm going to tell you tonight is of the Mad Madam of the Lalaurie Mansion. So some of you may know about the Lalaurie Mansion. There it is right there. And maybe it's the lack of lights in the upstairs floors, or maybe it's the crowd standing on the corner of Royal and Governor Nichols streets with their mouths agape that clue you into the fact that something sinister happened in the imposing 3-story house known as the Lalaurie Mansion. And you'd be right. Although the house has had some notable owners, currently a Texas oil baron and previously Nicolas Cage, the owner whose namesake still cleaves to the house is the most famous of all. And we are talking about Marie Delphine McCarty, who became Delphine Lalaurie. She was born in 1787 to a wealthy plantation family in what is now the Bywater area of New Orleans, and all of that area is reintegrated into the city itself. But at the time, it was plantation land. At age 13, so times were different, guys, but this is still young and scandalous. At age 13, she was involved in a scandalous affair with a 35-year-old widower, Ramon Lopez y Anglo. Within 6 months, they were married without the permission of the Spanish king. And Ramon was a Spanish national who had come over, who was supposed to be the alcalde or assistant alcalde, something like that. And so the Spanish king had sent him over, and if they were going to marry a local, they had to have permission from the king, which the families managed to circumvent. But when the king found out, he ordered Ramon back to Spain, where he died in a demeaning position and location. But he was also quite wealthy. He had money in New Orleans and property in New Orleans, which Delphine inherited. So even though he got sent back, she inherited everything he had in New Orleans. So the now widow Lopez then married a Frenchman, Jean Blanc, and had 5 children. But 1 year after the famous Battle of New Orleans, which actually happened after the end of the Spanish-American War, the word just hadn't reached the city that the war was over. But after the famous Battle of New Orleans, 50-year-old Blanc died, leaving behind an estate of massive debt. Delphine, who was 28 years old by then, shrewdly renounced their marital property so she could keep her own fortune intact, and then auctioned off her late husband's physical property. So Delphine knew how to wiggle her way out of her spouse's debt and did not actually have to take on any of that. By the time she met her final husband, she was once again a wealthy woman, retaining her own wealth and inheritance from now also her father. Dr. Louis Leylaurie arrived from France to cure hunches. He was essentially a chiropractor. An affliction one of Delphine's children needed help with. Well, a professional relationship quickly became a personal one, and Delphine became pregnant out of wedlock. She and her husband had the date of their marriage set back 6 months prior to the actual date in the church records to hide the bastard child. So just a little conniving. Things already giving us a bit of a soap opera look at Delphine Leylaurie. But if that's not enough for you, we can keep going. Things only get worse from here. Delphine often found herself in violation of the Code Noir, which were laws put in place that provided penalties for the harsh treatment of enslaved people in Louisiana. Delphine was often fined and even had her slaves taken from her, and she was forbidden to buy any more. Well, Delphine didn't like that, so she coerced family members to buy them back for her. And Delphine's crimes were, of course, savage abuse. One instance happened to a slave girl that snagged Madame's hair while brushing it. Delphine chased the poor girl around the galleries, which are the balconies around the New Orleans homes, with a whip, and the girl did fall to her death, which, of course, involved other penalties for Delphine Leylaurie. But the big thing that happened, if that wasn't enough, in 1834, a fire broke out in the servant wing of the mansion of the now legally separated Leylauries. They had a very violent relationship, horrible fights. They ended up getting legally separated. But despite that split, they were both at home at the Leylaurie mansion when the slave quarters caught fire. As flames spread, the judge gave orders to break down the doors despite the raging of the Leylauries for them to mind their own business. They did not want anyone going in to the slave quarters, even though they could hear people screaming. They knew that there were people inside, and the judge finally had the doors broken down. And inside, the horror they found was far worse than the flames raging on the outside. All right, so sensitive folks, some graphic descriptions coming up here. So tune out for just a second. Close your eyes, close your ears, whatever you got to do. They're not too bad, but worse than some of my other stories.
Oh my God.
The slave who started the fire was chained to the stove. She later said that she would rather burn than spend one more day in that house. Others were disfigured in ways that could only have meant that they were being used by the Leylauries as medical experiments. And so much of this also incriminated her husband, not just the Mad Madam that people tend to pin it on. She would have had his help, or this would have been part of his interest that probably was the catalyst for some of this. One man, and these descriptions were coming from eyewitnesses at the time that were part of police reports. One man had a hole in his head that was filled with worms. A woman became known as the Crab Woman because her limbs had been broken and reset and rehealed in ways that made her resemble a crab crawling across the floor. Others were chained to the wall or in cages, some stripped of their skin, some in iron collars and heavy chains, others stretched by their limbs. Reports from witnesses describe the scars and mutilation of at least 7 slaves that were rescued from the flames. And then they were all taken to the Cabildo and given whatever medical care they could, but ultimately many of them died as a result later on. Now, the crowd gathering outside was growing in rage as they awaited the arrest of the Laylaries for their heinous crimes, again, in horrible violation of the Code Noir, which was actually taken very seriously in the city of New Orleans. And they were growing angrier and angrier as no arrests were coming and the Laylaries were still inside their home. So the crowd decided they were going to take action. The crowd planned a lynching of the Laylaries because if they were not going to be arrested, they needed to be punished in whatever way possible. But before the crowd was able to carry out their plans, the carriage gate burst open, and here it is right here, that gate in the middle. And the couple was driven out by their trusted driver in their carriage. So here stories differ on what became of the Laylaries after their escape from justice, and they did escape justice. Most agree that Madame Laylarie, and probably her husband Louis as well, fled to France and died there, but Madame's remains were exhumed and returned to New Orleans later on for burial. Records show that she is buried in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 in the tomb of her son's family. There are stories that she fled to New York, she fled to the Northeast, then on to France, or that she came back and was living in the Metairie area. Stories are unclear, but we do know where she is finally buried. We just don't know necessarily the route that she took to actually end up there. Now, if you are fans of American Horror Story, you may have heard a little bit about Delphine Laylarie. This may be someone who is not unfamiliar to you. And we can agree that Kathy Bates looks nothing at all like the real Delphine in American Horror Story Coven, but that doesn't mean she doesn't do the Mad Madam justice, and she did a phenomenal job. But even Kathy Bates said that Delphine was far worse than her character Annie Wilkes in Misery. And the house in the show is not actually the Laylarie mansion. The oil baron who owned it came outside as the crew was actually setting up to film the house, threatened to shut down production and sue them for everything they had if they included a single shot of his house. And so they filmed the house next door, which is equally creepy but less impressive. And so when you watch American Horror Story Coven about Delphine Laylarie, the house that is shown is not the actual Laylarie mansion. It's the house next door. But Nicolas Cage bought the house, and he lived in New Orleans for a couple of years in that house, and actually had his own, he has his tomb in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. It's already there. It's waiting for him. It's a pyramid. I don't know why. No one really knows why. But he really wanted to stay in New Orleans, except for the fact that after he bought the house and only lived there for a couple of years, he experienced a financial and professional tailspin after moving in, which locals will say is, of course, the curse of the Laylarie mansion on Nicolas Cage. And since the fire all the way back in the 1800s, locals have reported hearing screams from the house that sat abandoned for 40 years. After the mob did not get their justice on the Laylaries, pretty much they just destroyed the house. It sat there vacant for 40 years, and lots of screams were heard. They still are to this day sometimes. Residents that attempted to live there have had other horrors, including a woman who lived there during the property's time as a tenement. She had infant twins, and she got up one night to check on them and saw a woman in black at the top of the stairs that said she was going to throw the babies down the stairs. The mother raced to their crib, found the baby safely there, but said that the same figure was standing over the bed the night after. When the mother rushed over, the figure vanished, but a sock had been shoved into one of the infant's mouths. Other lights, orbs, and ghostly shadows have been captured in photos taken outside by tour groups. Some also will see the slave girl who fell to her death running across the balcony. And so the haunted mansion of Delphine Laylarie, Mad Madame Laylarie, as she is known. And of course, the Mad Madame had her share of family dysfunction, which has led to her being one of the worst women in New Orleans history in one of the most haunted houses in the city. And that says a lot for the city of New Orleans. So Delphine Laylarie, the Mad Madame, is legendary in that town. So that brings us to something a bit lighter here, because we're going to add the humor to the thriller for just a second. And so we're going to get to our lagniappe question. And lagniappe is a Louisiana word for a little something extra. It's like the 13th donut in a baker's dozen. So here's our chance for our viewers to kind of learn a little bit about you, maybe on a more personal note here. So our lagniappe question today is, who in your own family do you think can get away with murder. So here's Eddie Haskell here. Always looks good on the surface, but Eddie's always up to something. So Eddie was the one who could always get away with murder because, of course, the grown-ups thought Eddie wouldn't do that. Always blaming the Beeb and Wally. So who in your family is the Eddie Haskell?
Whoa.
Huh.
Wow.
If you don't know who it is, it's probably you.
I think it's me because I watch so many true crime shows. Like, I feel like I know how to poison someone. I know how to evade the police. I'm very skilled, I think. So I can, like, it's not like I'm so charming. Of course I can get away with murder. I just know the most about how to kill someone.
All right, so we have Elyssa's admission on live internet here. So we'll be sure to submit this later on. No, I'm kidding. So who else is the Eddie Haskell? Anybody else actually know for a fact that they are their family's Eddie Haskell? They can get away with murder.
I don't know. I would say Eddie Haskell, but my mother once was robbed by somebody. She was very small, like 4'8", and she was robbed as an elderly woman by a guy who was 6'3" and 30 years of age, and he started to push her, and she took off her stilettos, and she jumped up around his neck and stabbed him in the eyes with the stiletto.
Oh my God.
So I think she could do it. I don't know if she'd get away with it, but she could do it.
Wow, Mom's a badass. That's pretty awesome. That's amazing.
Definitely not Eddie Haskell.
No, but that's cool. I like that story. He doesn't have to be an Eddie Haskell. That's awesome. Who else has a family member that can get away with anything? We all got the one. And it's the sweet eyes. That was a sad face.
Just my younger sister, because she's so nice. Everybody loves Sheila. She could get away with murder. I think your parents get tired with the oldest kids, and then by the time the youngest one comes around, they're like, whatever, just do what you want. So
yeah, there's a lot of that. I don't have time for this. Just as long as you're not burning anything down, no one's bleeding, no bones are sticking out. That was kind of my mom's rule for us. If she was cleaning the house and we got sent outside, her rule was don't come back inside unless you are bleeding and there's bone exposed, because otherwise you just rinse it off with the hose and go back to playing. Like, whatever you've done, it can't be that bad. I'm cleaning the house, stay outside. So, but now my brother could probably actually get away with murder. And, I would think that it's actually my oldest son in the family because, Camden can get away with just about anything. Not that he's ever really done anything that needs to be gotten away with, but he's just the kid because he's the oldest grandchild on both sides. And so, he was the golden boy. But my brother could probably get away with murder only because he's a homicide and cold case detective and a former Marine. So we always say not only does he know 100 ways to kill you, but also how to get away with it. Not that he would. I mean, he's the greatest guy, best dad, love my brother to death. He is my hero. But, that very quiet boy who does not remember telling me I had short legs. I mean, he remembers so many details. I'm pretty sure that was selective memory there. But, he's the greatest guy ever, but absolutely could actually technically probably get away with murder for the same reasons Elyssa can. Just knowledge, not necessarily because he's an Eddie Haskell. Sarah, you said it was not you? You're not the Eddie Haskell?
No, between me and my sister, I'm the oldest. She's 8 years younger than me. And I would always, butt heads directly with my parents when they wouldn't let me do something. Whereas my sister would just lie. Yeah, she's like, oh, I'm spending the night at, Marky's house. And they'd go to a party. So between the two of us, I can't tell a lie to save my life and make it convincing. So if there was a murder, dead body, me and my sister in a locked room, it would be her.
Just based on her ability to lie.
She's not a murderer at all. She's much nicer person than me, but
she's just got the lying thing down, which is a handy skill if you're trying to get away with something, for sure. Amy, what about you? Who can get away with murder in your family?
Well, my partner always tells me don't commit a murder or a crime because everybody would be able to trace every move that you made. I have a tendency to leave a physical trail. So if we're talking literal murder, it's probably not me. I don't know. I think my brother is the kind of person that things always work out for. I don't know if that's quite the same thing. But I think it's because he doesn't stress as much as I do.
He just lets the pieces fall into place on their own.
Yeah, he's always kind of done that. I could tell a few stories about him, but I don't know if he'd want me to. But yeah, so I don't know if that's the same thing exactly, but he's definitely the one that things always fall into place pretty swiftly.
I'll take that. I'll take it. I think that absolutely works. So we're going to wrap things up today. I'm going to put some of your books up here. So guys, as you are watching this, whether you're watching live or you're watching in replay, you know the drill here. We always show a couple of examples, or at least what, I chose to actually put up here. I'm going to say it. I just pick them because I like the covers. So whether it's the only book or there are more, this is just what I choose. So I want you guys to go out there, support our authors who have been on our show today. And go find their books, pre-order if they are not out. Pre-orders are a great way to help an author and to help send a book into the world with great success. Pre-orders are very, very important. But you know how I feel about this. So I would love for you to read more about the book on Amazon. Leave your reviews on Amazon's. But guys, I'm a huge supporter of local bookstores. Annie McDonald, who's our executive producer, is as well. In fact, we've got something on World of the Right Review, our group page over there, where we're doing some things with some indie bookstores through our bookshop page. So go support those indie bookshops who have been struggling a bit through COVID and order your books through them. But make sure that you're also leaving those reviews for the authors because they are a tremendous boon and a tremendous help to those authors as well. And so we've got these fabulous books and these fabulous authors. So we also have another dysfunctional family in Crescent City Moon, which is the first in my series. So let's learn a little bit about that through our trailer about that dysfunctional family. All right, that's a dysfunctional family. Talk about magic, murder, secrets, all of that stuff going on. Christina had to jump off, so she says thank you very much and good night to everyone. But if you have not seen this episode from the beginning, or if you want to watch it again, or check out any past episodes of the Second Line Show, they all live over on YouTube on our Nola Nash Entertainment channel. And Annie and I have done some great specials in the past, and they live there as well. So we've done some great stuff, some fun stuff, including the dating game, which was absolutely hilarious. So if you're looking for something funny, that's a good place to go too. So we are on episode 28 of the Second Line Shows, and also several specials in there as well. So lots of stuff to go catch up on over on Nola Nash Entertainment. So check those out. And ladies, thank you so much for spending this evening with me. This has been such fun. So thank you so much. And we will see you guys on the Second Line Show next week.